everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Congressman Derek Tran, a member of the For Country Caucus. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Brittany. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you back. There is a lot to discuss. I first want to start off the conversation by talking about the partial government shutdown affecting the Department of Homeland Security. There's seemingly no end in sight. It's been dragging on. We are officially in day 14. Democrats want to see reforms to ICE and other guardrails imposed on DHS. So where are negotiations right now when it comes to funding?
Look, I think what we're seeing today is that the community, Americans out there want to see oversight on ICE and CPB. And that's what we as Democrats are trying to do. Now, Rosa DeLauro has this bill out where we can break up the funding for FEMA, for the Coast Guard, and really continue to negotiate on the ICE and the Customs and Border Patrol part of all of this. I've signed on to that, and I think that's a smart idea. We should continue to fund those agencies that are not associated with, the lack of oversight that's happening with ICE agents on our street, their lack of training, and the fact that they're mass and really terrorizing our community.
There's polling that suggests that even Republicans are uncomfortable with ICE's tactics. They feel that ICE goes too far, they're too aggressive. And Democrats have a list of demands to reform DHS and rein in ICE. And they include things like ensuring immigration enforcement is targeted, barring agents from wearing masks, and implementing a use of force policy. There's others as well. But when it comes to those points, where are Republicans and Democrats having the toughest time finding consensus?
I think it really has to do with the funding part of ICE right now. I think when it comes to the Republicans, they want to give that free rein for their secretary to be able to make the decisions on masks, on where they want to target in which communities, which state. But at the same time, Democrats are looking at this from a very narrow perspective. We want ICE I want ICE, and I'll speak for myself on this one. I want ICE to be there to make sure they enforce the hardened criminals out there. I want to make sure that they're not scaring kids from going to school. They're not scaring our community from attending church. They're not scaring workers who need to show up to the job place so our economy can run. So I continue to fight for those things. And I think there are Republicans out there that are seeing this.
I noticed that you said, I'll speak for myself and I, and didn't use we. Does that suggest that there's a lot of daylight when it comes to Democrats on how they feel they want to see ICE operating?
Look, I think it's important that I, as an individual, share my thoughts on these things. Now, I don't sit on the Homeland Security Committee. I sit on Armed Services. And I don't want to speak for all members from my caucus either. But I do think that when there are members out there who talk about free rein for ICE to do whatever they want, I don't agree with that, right? And when there are members out there that talks about defunding ICE, I don't agree with that either. I think there's a balance to all of this. And that's why I like to talk about it in my own perspective.
And is there bipartisan consensus and agreement around slicing up the funding like that legislation you supported so FEMA gets funded and other areas get funded?
From what I last heard, not yet, but I think the pressure is on. People are feeling it. Like you said, we're on X day into the shutdown, and we want to make sure that America runs, and we want to make sure that government employees are paid. But at the same time, Congress has to do their job in oversight.
To that point, yeah, people want to make sure the government's running. I actually was on a flight during the shutdown. That wasn't affected, but we know historically, as government shutdowns go on, there are more and more effects that are visible to the everyday American. But during his State of the Union, President Trump put the blame on this shutdown on Democrats. So let's say you're a DHS worker, you're missing a paycheck, you are not getting paid. You hear the president blaming Democrats. They're blaming you for not getting paid. What do you say to that?
Look, I'll say that we are trying to do our job. But at the same time, when you're in the minority, there's only so much we can do. So when Republicans have control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, this shutdown is on them, not Democrats.
And do you think there's any urgency when it comes to getting this shutdown over with, getting this resolved, getting DHS funding resolved? Because since it's not as long as that other shutdown in the fall, and it's not as big as that shutdown, there's not as much attention on it.
Yeah, you're right, but I think the priority here is making sure that there are good government workers, employees like TSA agents that we need to make sure they get paid. There are FEMA personnel that we got to make sure they get paid. As this continue, I do believe that we are going to be able to get some consensus on splitting this up, so then we can really focus on ICE and that oversight.
And to your earlier point about this dragging on, like we said, 14 days, have you gotten a sense that negotiations have moved at all from day 1 to day 14?
Yeah, I'm very what I'm hearing from our leadership, and that includes Representative and Ranking Member Rosa DeLauro, is that they're talking at their level. But like anything, when you're dealing with billions of dollars in budget and you're dealing with such a division within the two caucuses, it's going to take some time for them to resolve. But I do have faith that they're going to figure this out.
Last month, we saw 2 American citizens fatally shot in Minneapolis while protesting an immigration enforcement operation there. And their names were Alex Preddy and Renee Good. President Trump didn't mention either of those names during his State of the Union. He didn't mention Minneapolis. He didn't mention ICE by name. But when he talked about immigration, there was one moment he invited attendees to stand if they agreed that, quote, the first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. Right after he said that, the camera had a wide shot on the chamber. You saw Republicans standing. You saw Democrats who were there, who attended the State of the Union. They were all seated. What did you make of that moment? What were you thinking during that time?
Yeah, I think that was a very powerful moment for me, because in hearing what the president was saying, I don't disagree with him that, our job is to make the American people feel safe. But at the same time, how can you stand there and welcome the fact that you, or through your ICE agents and through your cabinet, killed 2 Americans? Like, I couldn't stand for that. So that's why I remained seated. And I think a lot of my colleagues did the same. I will say that, I hear from my constituents all the time, and I recognize that the president has been able to slow the inflow of migrants into our country, and he should be applauded for that. But there's also a way to do such in a humane way, and that's what troubles me. It's seeing that ICE agents are only trained for 45 days before they're put on the streets. That's scary.
I was speaking with a Democratic strategist about that moment, and she said, President Trump, before politics, he did have a career in TV, as we know, as The Apprentice. He during that show, he has these made-for-TV moments. And we were just thinking about the midterms and how Republicans could use an ad like that and show Republicans standing, Democrats sitting. The ad almost writes itself, right? Republicans saying, see, Democrats don't care to protect you. I mean, what would you say if a constituent saw that moment and said, don't you care about Americans? Don't you think that the first duty is to protect American citizens?
I think it's sad that we have to politicize deaths of Americans with border security, and any image that the Republicans wants to play of Democrats trying to conduct oversight or us not standing because we want secure borders as well is completely false. I think when you look at the facts, and Ms. Good, when you look at the facts with the deaths of the American citizens, people resonate and they feel that, and they think of themselves. Is it safe for them to exercise their First Amendment right to go out there and protest? Is it safe for their kids to take such action? And right now, it's not, and that's a guaranteed First Amendment right that we all have. I think that is going to be more powerful than any image of Democrats sitting down during State of Union with the president doing his tricks and making up stuff. Yeah.
A Republican Senator, Jim Justice, he told MS Now that he doesn't think the DHS funding fight has anything to do with DHS funding. He thinks it's a midterm play. What do you make of that?
No, I don't agree with him. I think the midterm play is, there's no play. I think everyone is looking at the records of the governing party right now, and that's the Republicans. We're looking at the fact that healthcare got cut and sliced and just divided in this country. So when millions of Americans are going to be kicked off of the ACA, 15 million, last I heard, that is an issue. That is what we're going to be talking about when November rolls around. That's definitely what I'm talking about when I'm in district. Affordability is huge. I come back and people are still telling me, when are we going to see the relief? And that's something we've heard very little from the president during his State of the Union. I think, total time he spent on affordability was 2 or 3 minutes during his record long 2-hour speech. So, I'm going to run on my record. The Republicans can run on theirs. And I really do think that November is going to be a turning point for this country, because the Republican has to answer for their legislation and their governance of this country.
To that point, when it comes to the midterms, top issues for Americans continue to be the economy, the cost of living, affordability. And President Trump in the past, he's called affordability a Democratic hoax. He said the economy's roaring back. This is a good economy. It's the Democrats' fault if it doesn't feel right, if it's not working for you, is essentially his messaging for the past couple of months. What do you make of that? And what's your response to people saying, the economy's not working for me now? It also wasn't working for me when President Biden was president back in 2023, 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when it comes to this president and this administration, we have to look at not just words, but action, right? Words, I'm going to lower costs from day one. Action has not done anything to lower costs. Words, he wants to make sure that people can afford homes. And then more words saying, oh no, I want home prices to remain high. Like I don't know what to believe when it comes to this administration anymore, but I do know that when consumers, when my constituents, my community look at their bank account and what they're paying out and their credit card bills and their utility bills, they are not better off today than they were 2 years ago or even 14 months ago.
I do know. For the final portion of this conversation, I do want to get your perspective on Iran, because you're a veteran, you enlisted in the Army Reserve, you were activated for Operation Enduring Freedom. And when it comes to Iran, it seems like, according to reporting, President Trump is really weighing his potential military options when it comes to the region. We've seen a large military buildup in the Middle East, the biggest since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. This comes as U.S. and Iranian officials have continued to meet for negotiations when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. And I want to talk about something in part President Trump said during his State of the Union about Iran. He said this, quote, "They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon. My preference is to solve this problem through diplomacy, but one thing is for certain. I will never allow the world's #1 sponsor of terror, which they are by far, to have a nuclear weapon. Can't let that happen." What are your thoughts on this, especially coming from someone who served in the military?
Yeah, look, it's really frustrating for me, right? I agree that Iran is a threat. I agree that Iran should not have nuclear capabilities where they can use it against us, because we want to make sure that we're secure and America is going to be safe from any type of attacks through Iran, through their agency with Hezbollah or Hamas or Houthis, you name it. I get it. But at the same time, as a veteran, I look at these actions that we're taking and this president is taking, where we shouldn't be committing ourselves to another forever war. We shouldn't be, if you're going to put American soldiers' lives at risk, military personnel at risk, you got to really think about what you're going to do here. You campaigned on no more forever wars. Let's stick to that. But at the same time, I think there is a way through the diplomacy to make sure that Iran does not build up their nuclear capabilities.
I think if you were tuning into the State of the Union, you could be getting conflicting messages, because in one breath, President Trump is saying, with Operation Midnight Hammer, we completely decimated, we obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. In the next breath, he's saying they're rebuilding that up. They're making missiles that could soon reach the United States. I mean, is there evidence of that? Because when we've seen President Trump's comments on that, when we've seen Vice President J.D. Vance echo a similar statement, something that was on Twitter yesterday were then photos of President Bush and other moments from that time talking about the weapons of mass destruction as justification for that war. And as we know, that those didn't exist.
Right, Brittany. And I think that's why the American people are so worried about getting into another conflict where we don't have the full details and they're not being presented the full details of what's happening in Iran and what these nuclear threats are. I want the president and I want this administration to be open with the American people. And if you're going to engage us into a real threat, like if you're saying Iran is a real threat, then make sure that we as Americans understand that. That's not what we're getting from him. We do not need another Iraq.
Is Congress getting anything from President Trump when it comes to Iran? I know that obviously you can't share classified information, but do you know if the United States is going to strike Iran?
Look, we're not getting enough. And I think a lot of news outlet is reporting out there that they're doing the bare minimum to satisfy the law to give notice to members of Congress. But this administration from day one has not been an ally or partner with this Congress. They just exercise and do what they want to do and then tell us after the fact, which is unfortunate and illegal.
You serve as a co-chair of the Democratic Caucus National Security Task Force. So I'm really curious, when we're talking about Iran, would a strike against Iran be in the best interest of U.S. national security?
I think for that question, it's a little loaded. Depends on whether we have the intelligence that they are developing nuclear weapons and they have reached a certain point where we believe that's a threat. I cannot take everything that this administration is just putting out there. These boat strikes in Venezuela, the attack on Iran, a few months ago. And exactly like you said, he says one thing, oh, we destroyed their capability, but then in the same breath, oh, we have to continue attacking them because they're a threat to the U.S. So which is it?
Congressman, I really appreciate the wide-ranging conversation today. You are welcome back anytime. Thank you so much for your perspective. I appreciate the conversation.
Thanks, Brittany. Take care.